Morning, dear friends. Welcome. Today is Monday, December 13th. It is the 9th of Tevis, which means tomorrow is the 10th of Tevis. Asar B'Tevis happens to be a Jewish fast day, but again, that's tomorrow, not today. We're gathered to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. At the present, we are studying Mesechet Shabbos Perek Asiri, the 10th chapter. And we're on page Sadik Gimel Amud Aleph, actually. It's 93a. I posted on the link. It was 93b. We'll get there in a moment. And we are still, well, yesterday was a break, and I want to thank you for your indulgence, and for those that weren't around. And for those that were confused, I apologize. The technology, based on Friday's experience, wasn't worth struggling with, but now I was able to get we're talking about
now you're breaking up.
You're breaking up. Yeah, no.
That worked. Maybe try making a voice call on another, like we've done in the past when we had internet issues. And dial in.
Must be the same technology as our elevators.
Hello.
Yeah, your voice is.
That's better.
Oh, but for some reason, our microphone here is having some issues.
Your voice is now better.
What about now?
You're good.
Hold on, one more thing. Now?
Good.
Okay, good. All right, sorry about that. If I conk out, give me a visual, because I probably won't hear you if my sound isn't working. All right, good morning, welcome again. We're now talking about carrying on Shabbos, and particularly some of the particulars of joint carrying, when two people are carrying something together. That itself is a little bit complicated. We presented a variety of shitot, of opinions about carrying something jointly. A few days ago, we explored how it has to do with a reading of a pasuk. It talks about doing a sin in a mistaken manner. And depending on how you read that pasuk, you may have sufficient pasuk weight to tell you that when someone does a sin jointly, they could be off the hook if it is jointly. Now the question is, what does a joint desecration of Shabbos look like? Is it where there are two equal partners? Are both people needed for this process? And could you be chayiv if they both are needed or unneeded? And now we're up to the subject of one person can carry it alone. The other person is there helping, but they cannot do it on their own. And the question, the way the Gemara frames it, is what is the halachic treatment of a misayeya, an assist that doesn't really carry a bulk of the weight, is it considered something of substance or is it halachically non-existent? That's really the question that our Gemara is asking. I'm going to share the screen and we'll get to it. Again, I'm going to ask you to give me a visual indication if there's anything wrong with the sound. So that is that. Amar Mar, just to repeat, I know we started this on Friday, but we had some problems with our sound. Let's go through it again. And again, I'm still getting my voice fully back. I want to thank you for your indulgence. Amar Mar. We quoted earlier, Zayachol v'Zayneyachol. Two people are carrying something jointly on Shabbos. One has the capability of doing it solo, and the other needs help. Divrei Hakol Chayiv, our Brisa taught us, everyone agrees, there is culpability. Question is, who is culpable? The Mr. Yachol, the Mr. Eina Yachol? The guy who could do it alone, or is it the guy that's helping? The Gemara asks, Hi, Meinayu Chayiv. Who do we intend to say is Chayiv? Rav Chisda weighs in, Rav Chisda Zesha Yachol, the guy who could do it alone, he is Chayiv. He is liable. Why? Because he carried an item from beginning to end, and he could have done it alone, and he practically did do it alone. Because the help that he received was not substantive, because the guy who helped is Eina Yachol. The guy who's incapable of carrying, his contribution is not that great. My ka'avid, what really has he contributed to the act of carrying? So that's what Rav Chisda says. Rav Chisda says sometimes help is not a help at all. And if the help is nominal, and we can tell that it's nominal because he does not have the capacity to carry on his own. So my ka'avid, what is the significance of his actions? And therefore, Rav Chisda, with confidence, can say the one who's liable is the guy who was able to do it on his own. And he, for all intents and purposes, he carried it alone. Rashi, ein by mamash. The guy who's merely a help is not that significant. If the guy who wanted, the stronger person, the capable person, was carrying it, I'm sorry, the helper, Eina Yachol, would be incapable of carrying if he wanted to. So Ein Boy Mamish's contribution is not significant. We do not consider it to be anything at all. And it's not enough of a help to cause the main carrier to be off the hook because he did it jointly. Rebel?
Rabbi, is there any consideration to the fact whether he's carrying and he asks somebody to help him, and he's carrying, somebody comes to help and he says, "That's okay, I don't need you"?
Not in this conversation. Not in this conversation. Amar li Rav Hamnuna asks a good question though. I think it's what Rebel is intending, something of what Rebel intends to ask. You can't tell me he's a nobody. He's in the snapshot. His hands are on the item. He's bearing some of the weight. You're telling me he's a nobody. My ka'avid. I'll tell you what he's ka'avid. Ka'avid means what is he doing? I'll tell you what he's doing. He is helping. He is helping. So you cannot deny that which reality shows. We cannot deny the picture. The security camera footage is there. His hands are on the item. He's helping. Don't tell me he's not there. Don't tell me ein by mamash. But Rav Chisda says, no, I mean halachically, he's not there. Hold on. Amar lei, misayeya, a helper who's not bearing a prominent amount of the weight, ein by mamash. We do not view this halachically as something of significance. Professor.
Rabbi, it might be to address Reb Beryl's concern that the Gemara is not interested in motivation. Could be what we saw at the beginning of the tractate when we were talking about the Oni and the homeowner. The Gemara didn't consider who asked whom, whether he asked for alms or he didn't ask and he was invited. what was of interest is the act of transfer only. And
The facts.
probably in this case, it's also what is of interest is the act of carrying rather than who was initiator or who was invited.
Thank you, Professor. The reason why I was rude, actually, I should have stopped and explained. The reason why I really chose to temporarily not address Reb Beryl's question is because Reb Beryl was really referring to another scenario. Because once you have a person that's helping in middle, the helper is not even available for the totality of the act. I believe our Gemara could even be reasonably talking about two people that their hands were present from the beginning to the end. And that I meant to address this now, so I'm glad. So here we're talking about where from the beginning to the end, two people pick it up and carry it. But we know, maybe everyone knows, that in truth, as the professor says, we have the ability to gauge whose weight, whose strength is contributed. And we understand that one guy is entirely capable and the other guy is barely contributing at all. And so all that's interesting halachically is not the emotions of the relationship and not even the kavana, the details of how it unfolded. All that's interesting here is who carried most of the weight, who did not. And that's where our halachic question is. Dr. Hammer, you're on, so I'd like to take a moment again to extend a big mazel tov to you and your wife and the mechutonim and the parents for the simcha this weekend. And
love to talk more about it. I appreciate all of the good wishes from many people in the Chavran, from the shul. It was lovely. I'll talk about it some other time.
Okay, well, just as you came on and if you were not available, the Bo Bayom, so I wanted to wish you our congratulations now.
Thank you.
And welcome on. So again, many times, I'll say this, although I say this, but back to the Gemara, I say this with a little bit of trepidation and probably warranted trepidation. My mother went to a Beis Yaakov high school, and her teachers were mostly, if I'm not mistaken, of Lithuanian background, and probably a little bit more of the old school than maybe what you'd expect today. And so the girls, the girls didn't learn a lot of Gemara. I may have shared this story before, but the Rebbes were yeshiva educated, and so inevitably Gemara would come in, and the girls, my mother would like to badger the Rebbes. Why don't we learn Gemara? It's not fair. We should be learning Gemara. And again, I'm not taking a position on the question. This is the policy of the specific Beis Yaakov that she was in. And one day the Rebbe told the whole story from the Gemara, and I know I shared this before, about how someone was witnessed an event and they had passed on, and somehow in a mystical, miraculous way, the individual was brought back to life, provided testimony, and then went back to the grave. Again, I don't even know enough of the context to provide the context, but this is the story. And my mother shared how all the girls became very, very distraught, and understandably so, because there's a lot of emotion involved, and say, why couldn't he at least go say hello to his family before reverting back to his previous state, taking on a justifiable, emotionally obvious question. And her Rebbe said, girls, this is the reason why we don't teach you Gemara. Again, a very misogynistic comment from a different. My point is that there is a inherent, I don't know what his point was. My mother would always laugh and say, my mother was a good feminist, so don't take it the wrong way. But my mother would always laugh at that story, at how it unfolded. But the point is, it's a challenge, a legitimate challenge. Again, the anecdote is just an anecdote, which is emotion is real, kavana is real, and it's hard to activate and deactivate. And I suspect this is the case also with anybody who studies the law, and there sometimes has to be somewhat of a removed kind of approach. And I suppose in medicine as well, where there's so much emotion, and there are the sciences of emotion, and then on occasion we have to remove emotion. And it's even more complicated if you're a person that's steeped in Hasidic teaching, which teaches us the value of kavana and emotion, and it's kind of a little bit of a exercise of activating and disactivating or temporarily muting different legitimate analysis, because an emotional analysis, in my opinion, is a valid and appropriate analysis. So it's many times challenging to activate and temporarily pause. And so my comments are just comments. It's a challenge that we legitimately confront. And so even in a story, sometimes we want to, there's a question of fairness, right? If the guy if the carrying person asked his friend for help, and I'm not saying there is no halachic difference, I'm just telling you the baseline reading here is that we're less interested of the conversation and more interested by the simple facts, even though it does remove some of the reality of the story. And I guess that's like, well, anyways, I don't know. I'm just bringing it up because it's a challenge that we all face. I wanted to acknowledge it.
Rabbi, where does this saying "Noshim Datim Kalos" come from?
There is a context. There's a specific story in the Gemara. We'll get to it, I think.
Okay.
I don't want to rehash it now. There's a specific story, and when we get to that story, we'll study and we'll discuss it. And
Okay.
But I think it's important to bear in mind that at least my perspective, and I'm dealing with this as a parent of children in school, where different people assimilate information differently. And a lot of times there's an instinct to label a child who absorbs and assimilates information in a specific way. If it's not in line with the default setting of a presentation, we want to assume those kids are less gifted or intellectually stunted. I'm not saying that I've experienced a statement, but what you discover when you're a human being, but as a parent, you're more acutely aware of it, is that different kids absorb information differently. And you can have a kid who's incredibly intelligent, but a certain method of communicating information doesn't work well with them. And so there's an instinct to want to say, oh, they are less able. And the reality is, of course, that's a two-dimensional take on reality, which is that everybody has their own way of absorbing information. So I would say that is as far as every student or every human being is concerned. And it's also, I think, the analysis, or at least my modern take on it, is that the Gemara acknowledges that males and females might generally have a distinct way of taking information. I don't think, in as much as that's true, and I'm not saying that it's true, it's not perceived broadly as a strength and a weakness. It's simply a compliment. So I know, for example, when dealing with just think of an instance, a couple that's struggling with something, they'll talk to me and my wife, and I'll have a certain take on it, and my wife will have a different take on it. And I'm so thankful my wife is in on the conversation, because her perspective is usually usually more essential even than mine. But you need to have different people's approaches to have that fullness. And so I think just as far as Noshim Datim Kalos, in a certain context, and again, I know this is apologetics, but in a certain context, there is a statement that there's a weaker mind, but the reality of it is that every strength comes with a weakness, and every weakness comes with a strength. And I think that you need to have the totality of the different approaches to have the ultimate proper appreciation of reality, and certainly when it comes to addressing an issue. So that was a long. Yes.
No, it's long, and I don't want to comment. I want to put it on the list. We used to have a list until a few months ago to talk about learning differences as dealt with or not dealt with in Jewish schools in America, in Florida, in New Jersey, or whatever.
Well, I'll just tell you this. It's something that I take personally.
Yeah.
And myself as a student, again, this is not good or bad. I think, like, I was a student that school was good for. I was a student that worked well with the present yeshiva system. But that was in a way a blessing. But it just means that but right. That's not the totality of how information is assimilated, and many other people are dealt an unfair an unfair hand when schools are less diversified in their methods of teaching. I will say, by the way, and this is a long way of saying I'm not going to address the topic. The Jewish Learning Institute, for example, the JLI, which we are a part of, one of their goals in developing that program is realizing that adults, just like kids, different people appreciate different styles of teaching. And so the more you can incorporate a visual, and the more that you can incorporate narrate stories, and the more that you can diversify the different narratives and styles, the more you can hopefully attract and communicate to the largest number of individuals. And so it's certainly a real enduring dynamic that we would ignore at our own peril. Rebero.
I just want to add one line, which I didn't even see so much in myself, but in my children. It's not the school, it's the individual teacher. I could definitely correlate the teachers they liked with the success in the subject directly.
Agreed. Absolutely. And there's a lot more awareness. I'll just say this, Doctor, to continue to not address the question. There's a lot more awareness than there was once upon a time.
Oh, absolutely.
Baruch Hashem, but it's still there's still room for continued improvement, particularly because as Rebero says, every teacher, you might be educated about a problem or a reality, but if you're unable to really, be part of that solution, there's still room for continued growth. Yeah. But Baruch Hashem, the Jewish world is like.
Just one last comment, that things are improving, and even within the last year, there's been certain decisions made by the federal government in terms of allocating additional funding to non-public schools, parochial private schools, for dealing with what they call special education, special needs children, and programs which now, if schools haven't applied for it, should know, should, and there's significant amounts of money for children who are diagnosed as having learning disabilities. And there are schools that are, if I may say, are smart enough to know how to effectively utilize this federal allocation. And I'll leave it at that. The rest is not for
Idach Pirusha.
Bernie, I think that case is at the U.S. Supreme Court today.
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I know what I'm referring to.
No, the allocation of funds to parochial schools.
But Dr. Hammer's talking specifically about special education and diagnostic.
Right, exactly.
Baruch Hashem. But yeah, there's still. All right, let's.
Only on this chavruso can you go from the two guys carrying something to special ed.
Because that's exactly what's going on over here. Is that there's anyways, okay. So we have Rav Chisda saying the helper is non-existent. We have Rav Amnuna saying, but he's there, he's in the picture. And so Rav Chisda says, I didn't mean to say he's non-existent. This is definitely what I mean to say is Misayaya in by Mamash. His help is not really substantive because the absence of his help wouldn't cause this venture, this carrying exercise to fail. And he himself is incapable of carrying it himself, and therefore his contribution is nominal, and it is halachically inconsequential. That's not to say that he may have eased up the burden on the carrier by a few pounds. But we're just saying that halachically, for the purposes of extending a waiver to the primary carrier, and I say he's primary not only because he's bearing all the weight or most of the weight. The primary carrier is incapable, according to Rav Chisda, to apply for an exemption because the helper is not making a consequential degree of assistance. That is the analysis of Rav Chisda. The line that's important to note here is Misayeya ein by mamash. Help is inconsequential, insignificant, insubstantial. Why is this so important? Because the Gemara is now going to take a multi-line, several case journey to attempt to explore if this principle of misayeh, ein by mamash, help, is inconsequential, to see if this is a principle that it bears out across a variety of Jewish halachic topics. I just want to see if anyone can give us some basic. I'm going to look for a little more language, but we're probably not going to get. Hang on, let me see. All right, we'll leave it at that. But it's a very interesting question. And it reminds me of another thing. Sometimes kids want to help. I tell the kids, if you want to help, you got to help the way it's helpful. Help that's not helpful is not help. And so here we're making a halachic statement that help that's not helpful is not considered help. Okay, it's a little less. We're saying a little less now. We're saying help that's not actually a make it or break it kind of help. Halachically is not halachically significant. And here we go. Amar Rav Zvid Mishmei Rava. Rav Zvid, quoting Rava, chimes in and says, Afanan nami tanena. Indeed, there is a Mishnah, there's a subject in the Mishnah that makes this point. Which point? Rashi, the Messiah ein by mamash. I'm going to actually read Rabbi Steinsaltz's introduction here. It's something that we've discussed before, but it's not really on topic, and it's a little bit obscure for us. So here, the Mishnah talks about the law of a person that is classified as a zav. Certain emissions could cause a male to have the impure designation of a zav. A person that is a zav has the unique capacity, has certain unique halachas about the way they convey ritual impurity. One of the ways that they convey ritual impurity is that anything upon which a zav lies or rides. What does that mean? By Torah law, any vessel designated for lying or riding upon, which a zav lies or rides, becomes impure. If there is something that's distinctly used for riding, again, like an animal, they used to have saddles or cloths or whatever, as well as things to lay upon, they become impure even if the zav has no direct contact. Meaning, if the zav's weight is borne through or via a one of these items, it becomes impure. I know it still sounds obscure, but we'll read the text now, it'll make sense. So you have a person who has the ritual designation of a zav. They convey certain types of impurity. And he's sitting on a bed. Okay, the bed's impure. But what's interesting here is va'arba taliyos, or Rashi says talisois, tachas ragla hamita. Each one of the four bedposts has a garment, a talis underneath. The zav is not coming into any direct contact with the talisim. Now, I don't think it means like a talis. He stole 4 talisim from Shul and shoved them under his bed. It probably means a garment, because biblically, a talis is a garment, and when it has 4 corners, you have tzitzis. So again, so you have 4 garments that are under the 4 posts of the bed. Timei yois, each of them are ritually impure because all of them have had a significant role in bearing the weight of this person is zav. Why do we determine that each one of these 4 talisim, each of these 4 garments, have borne a significant amount of the weight of this zav? Because we know beds cannot stand on 3 posts. And so every post is fully engaged in bearing the weight of that which is upon the bed. By extension, everything that is supporting the post is also taking a significant and essential role in bearing the weight of the zav. Rashi. I know it's very technical. Rashi, no leg can, the bed will not stand in the absence of any of the 4 bedposts. Every leg of the bed, and by extension, anything that's supporting the legs of the bed, are each 100% involved in the support of this individual. The Gabi Midras Hazav Ba'inan Sheinase rubai alav. And when it comes to conveying the ritual impurity of a zav, but without direct contact, the item will receive ritual impurity if it bears the majority, the bulk of his weight. So it's a little bit of an obscure topic, admittedly, not directly related to our subject, but you'll see in a moment how it comes up. So again, a bed, 4 bedposts, each on top of 4 garments. A zav goes on the bed. The zav's weight is supported by the bed, which is supported by the 4 bedposts, which is supported by the talesim, the garments that are underneath the bedposts. The bed and the talesim all become ritually impure. The chiddush is that the talises, which are under the leg. Why is it a chiddush? Because each talis, each garment is only supporting 1/4 of the weight, but we don't look at it that way. We look at it as if all of them are supporting all of his weight because they are all essential. Rabbi Shimon disagrees and says, mitahir, they are tahar. You know why? He says because the weight is distributed across 4 items, each one is not carrying the bulk of his weight. And therefore, they're all tahar. Because it's when you look at each one in isolation, they are not responsible for the bulk of his weight. That's an. I'm trying to think. There is a legal parallel, but I'm drawing a blank now. If you think of something. Oh, I know. There's a question about culpability, and sometimes you can have multiple people that are involved. And so the question is, is everyone responsible or is no one responsible? Anyways. So this case is actually not what's interesting to us. The next case is what's interesting to us. What if a person that's a zav is riding on an animal? The arba taliya is tachas ragli abehema, and the animal has under each of its 4 legs a garment. Tahirais, every one of the 4 garments are tahar. Why? An animal which balances his weight does not need to stand constantly on 4 legs. As a matter of fact, an animal won't move much if it stands constantly on 4 legs. And so an animal is always shifting its weight between its 4 legs. Therefore, no one of the 4 legs, and by extension, no one of the 4 garments that are underneath the legs are really constantly bearing the entire or the bulk of the weight of the zav. The Gemara asks a good question by Mai. Why do we say that none of the legs are responsible for carrying the bulk of the person? It's true, but it has a very significant supportive role. Although every leg on their own could be eliminated, at least temporarily, but collectively, each leg is essential. Each leg has an important role to play in carrying the weight of the subject that's on the animal. The Gemara says, surely because here we'll apply the principle we've just discovered, which is misayeya, a supportive role, but does not take a bulk of the role. Ein by mamash halachically is insignificant. Again, remember, a garment will only become ritually impure without direct contact if it bears the bulk of the weight of the zav. Over here, no one leg can be alleged to have borne the bulk of the weight. Therefore, the material that's underneath the leg cannot be accused of bearing the bulk of the weight, and therefore you're off the hook. The Gemara asks, hold on, but each leg has a critical, essential role. And we say ostensibly the reason why each leg and each talus under each leg is pure is because although they are misayeya, they are helping in a substantive way, but they are not misayeya more than a quarter. And therefore, misayeya in by mamash, it is not considered halachically a help. Professor, you're muted. Please unmute. We'd love to hear your voice. Everyone's muted.
When we talk about Messiah, about helping, I think there is a difference between this context and the previous context in the sense that here helping means helping towards a specific goal, like traveling or whatever. But in the previous context, helping meant helping somebody. That is, the purpose of help was to help a person to carry, who could have done that by himself. And here, there is no person to be helped because all four legs carry the same burden.
So
They are
correct.
helping the goal of travel. So
what I'm sorry. So they are 100% different.
Switching the context, they use the same term, which I'm
Well,
not
it's
sure.
more than that. I think we could easily see a distinction between the two of them. But by using this same phrase in this context, I think what we are doing is we're helping us understand that it's more of an abstract idea and not just literally a person helping. It's what role does a supportive support play? Is a supportive role considered part of the essential act or not? I'll tell you more than that. I think this is a bigger chiddush. In a sense, there is more support on four legs than a weak guy tagging along and putting his hands on an item. Here, there is necessarily, each of the legs are necessarily bearing the weight. And so we're essentially extending the definition of support being insignificant and inconsequential. Not only in a case where I could get rid of the support, do we say it's not really significant, even when it absolutely bears weight. But you could juggle it, it's still considered aim by mamash, right? Because we're talking about an animal who can balance on three legs, but always does place weight on, it always does distribute the weight across its four legs in some kind of rotation. And so if we're going to say here, Messiah aim by mamash, I think we're extending the definition. Now, Professor, I could understand a counterclaim, which is over here, every leg also gets a total break. Whereas when two people are carrying something, even if they're bearing less weight, but ostensibly they're carrying consistent weight. But suffice it to say, the introduction of this text is to make this a little bit more of an abstract idea and less about if it's an individual or if it's a leg. It's more the concept of how much significance we give to something that plays a secondary role in bearing weight or a non-primary role. Because every leg relative to the other three legs is considered supportive.
But why would somebody put a talus under a bed? Unless it's unless he's in a windstorm, and he wants the talus he doesn't want the talus to fly away.
It's a good question.
Isn't that a sin?
My first answer respectfully is it doesn't really make a difference why it's there. Assuming it's there, it would have halachic implications. Right. But I know, for example, that my neighbors are very nervous that when the how do you call it? We put under the chairs, whatever you call it, it's like pads, and the pads fall off, and my neighbors don't like it, and I don't blame them for not liking it. And so I can imagine a scenario where you might want to put some padding under a bed too.
But isn't there a law about
Rabbi?
But a talus?
The word talus is not a talus.
That's what I
talus, just a garment.
That's what I explained the first time we used the word talus. Talus here doesn't mean that he stole 4 talisim from Shul. It just means 4 garments, 4 materials.
Okay.
So we're not talking about a talus. It could be a talus, but we're not talking about a talus. We're talking about a garment. It's like challah became something holy. Actually, it's not true because challah really originates from the mitzvah of challah. But yet, we use challah as bread. But it also means now ritual Shabbos challah. Anyways, so what happened here, just to refresh your memory, we're talking about 2 people carrying a beam. One guy is strong and bears most of the weight, and the other guy is tagging along. And we want to know if the primary guy is chayiv, is he liable? Or do we say that ultimately he had some help? We said, Misayaya ein by mamash. Rav Zid chimes in and says, yeah, there's another halacha about a zav totally out of left field, but there's also this idea of an animal that distributes the weight among 4 legs, and each leg on its own is misayaya. And so a piece of material that's bearing the weight of the leg, one leg, is tar, because Messiah in by mamash.
Rabbi, I still
Yeah.
don't understand something. Why would they, in one place, they describe it as garments, and the other side, they claim it as, they state it as a talus. The talus must be a talus.
So that's what I want to show you. Well, I'll just show you here briefly. In the English, it calls it a garment. In the Hebrew, it calls it a talus, because the correct translation of talus here is garment.
Uh-huh.
I'm enjoying using the word talus. It kind of, so I've been using it, but it's really, it means any garment.
Okay,
It could be.
my ignorance.
No, it's a good question. Thank you for. Lav mishum. So let me read this again. Why is each leg considered tahar? Ultimately, each leg is a necessary component of bearing the weight of the animal. The Gemara says, probably, wouldn't you say this is because Messiah in my mamash? And if that's the case, this text helps support Rav Chisda's assertion that Messiah in my mamash help doesn't help. So the Gemara answers, and Professor, here is where my comment to your comment gets thrown out the window. Amar Rav Yehuda midiskarta. Rav Yehuda says, it is plausible that a real Messiah is considered something of significance. But here is something unique. Shani hacha de akra lalegam. Here, with an animal that steps on 4 legs, every leg gets a total break. I think that's what we're saying. Where'd my cursor go? Okay, got it back.
Rabbi, I don't
Hold
want
on.
to. I don't want to go into Alan's territory, but when the animal lifts his leg, he still has weight on its body.
You're right. This is Alan's territory. Alan is, yeah, but the body has weight, but the leg does not. Right?
That
Rashi.
leg is still carrying the weight that's on top of the leg.
The leg that gets a break is getting a total break. And that's what we're saying. There's a distinction, and this is the distinction that actually I mentioned in passing when I was talking to the professor. And for some reason, my cursor just conked. So let's see if I can use, okay, I can use my arrows. Usually real help, legitimate help, the guy holding the beam, maybe that is considered Messiah. This is unique. Shani hacha, the akar leila gamri. One leg's getting a total break. The kiva on the zimnin akraha, the zimnin akraha, being that with an animal, each leg gets a total break.
Rabbi,
Leheve, hold on. Leheve kizav hamishapech. This would be like a scenario of a zav, as we'll see soon, who's constantly shifting his weight, who may actually, who does not convey ritual impurity under this circumstance.
Rabbi, even if you take a human being to lift your leg, it's very different if you have a 50-pound thing on your back lifting that leg.
True.
I don't
True.
understand the concept.
The concept is that factually, scientifically, take a look at a horse when it walks with something on its back. Guaranteed, there's always at least one leg in the air if it's moving.
I don't disagree.
Therefore, every leg gets a total break. Now, the horse isn't thinking, oh, wow, I'm going to relax my leg. The horse is thinking, I need to use this leg to propel myself forward. Well, the horse is probably not even thinking that. The horse is just walking. But the fact of the matter is, there's no single leg of a horse that bears the entire weight of the individual. It's constantly distributed across 4 legs, and each leg is constantly getting a break. That's a fact. And although we don't usually, Alan, we might enjoy being in the presence of horses or riding on horses, we probably never really spent a lot of time pondering the fact that each leg gets a break. But there is a halachic reason, obscure as it may be, where there's a difference, there's a distinction. And therefore we brought it up here.
There's always a chance that the horse can have a burden on his back and fall.
So that's a good question. The question now becomes, what if the zav was so heavy? The horse tries to get up and it can't, and the horse collapses. Probably then, this opinion would agree that the impurity is conveyed to the garments that are underneath the legs of the horse. I imagine so.
Same goes for the bed. If the guy is too heavy, the bed breaks.
Yeah. So the Gemara says, I don't care. Even if each leg gets up, we should still be able to convey ritual impurity. We should still not say that each leg is considered a total break. We should still be able to say, Misayeya, Leheve kizav hamishapech. Let this be like a zav who's extending his weight across, as you'll see. Zav shayimot al chamisha safsalim. Al chamisha pundois. You have a zav who's lying across 5 benches. By the way, this supports my assertion that we're talking about a heavy weight. No, I'm kidding. If a zav is lying in a way that he extends his weight across multiple benches, and the zav is shifting his weight. He's laying either on 5 benches or 5 pundais, 5 belts, which I imagine like 5 strips of material that are on the floor. La'arkan, if he sleeps according to the length of them, Tmeim, he conveys ritual impurity because his weight is on top of the entire item. L'rachvam, but if he's laying across the width, Tahirim, he's pure. They are pure. You know why? No one of these benches is bearing the most of his weight. Yashan, if he sleeps, by sleeping, we're not sure. Maybe he's going to twist and turn. Therefore, they become ritual. What do we see over here? What do we see over here? This raises the possibility that at some point he lay along their length and his entire weight was supported by one of them. Therefore, the benches are impure. A zav who moves his weight from one place to another renders all those places ritually impure. So just like a zav who rolls across different benches can make the benches entirely impure, the same thing should apply to the different legs. The weight is shifted from each leg, but each leg in the moment that it's bearing the weight is considered significantly involved. And therefore, we should go back to say, the reason why the animal, each leg is not convey ritual impurity is not to do with the fact that each leg gets a break. The reason why they're not ritually impure is because we similarly have been taught another teaching. We're going to turn the page, which is going to be another opinion in the same subject. Bear with me for a moment. My cursor conked out, so I need to be a little more rudimentary over here. Hasus mitame al yadav, hachamar al raglav. Another perspective on animals. This is a different opinion. One opinion says an animal spreads its weight across all 4 legs equally, and each leg is only considered a misayeh. But there's another opinion on the theory of animal weight distribution. Rabbi Allen, I need your presence. Help us out of it. A horse projects the ritual impurity to its front legs, and the donkey conveys ritual impurity of a zav via its back legs. You know why? The Mishnah says, a horse leans more weight on its front legs and a donkey on its hind quarters. So there's another principle that says that an animal, although animals move all their legs, but we consider the primary weight to be borne in a horse by its front legs.
But weight is weight.
But it's not just weight. Here it looks like it's also a question of balance. Why does Rav Yossi believe that ritual impurity is conveyed via the front legs? Ultimately, every leg is involved. The Gemara answers, La Mishum Darminon Misayeya Im Mamish. It's going to have to be about Misayeya, the question of helping insignificant. Rav Ashi says that we have another source. The source is about a kohen. A kohen. Okay, we're gonna stop here just because my cursor conked out. But I'll just tell you this, the spoiler alert. We'll study this tomorrow. A kohen. Alan, are you a kohen? So
That's what they call me.
When a kohen serves in the Beis Hamikdash, so they have to be standing on the ground, on the floor. Not only that, but kohanim were not allowed to wear foot gear. Kohanim had to be barefoot, and a kohen had to have his full feet on the floor. Alan, that's one of the reasons why the kohanim, it says, would get sick frequently, because the stone of the town of the Beis Hamikdash were cold, and they had special doctors to help treat the kohanim. Anyways, so suffice it to say, there's going to be a question if the kohen has his foot, one of his feet, on something else. Is his service in the Beis Hamikdash valid or not? And the question is ultimately going to come down to if the item he was leaning on was bearing most of his weight, it would be a problem. If not. And the Gemara will say, but at least that other vessel is Misayeya, it's helping him out. And the Gemara is going to say a familiar refrain, Misayeya ein by mamash, help is not considered halachically significant. But that we're going to study more at length tomorrow with the Mirz Hashem. Good health and good circumstances. Let me just close out before final comments. I want to read our dedications here. We are learning l'schus, the good health and well-being of all the dear members of the Chabura, and we're mentioning Leah Basrita, Malka Basrivka, Chaim, Baruch, Eliezer, Ben Esther, Kirsch, Tzvi, Ben Rachel, Ludmila, Bas, Jeda, and all of the members of our community and their families for good news, healthy news, happy news, nachas news, and all the good things. And with Hashem's help, I look forward to continuing our study tomorrow with more strength, more vigor, more voice. And thank you all for being here and for keeping the topic interesting and keeping all subjects considered. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Rabbi, I have one question.
Go ahead.
If a Zav is lying on the bench,
yes,
and then he gets up and walks away, and you and I, or any of us, sit on that bench, we don't even know we're ritually impure.
Good question. It's a question about the Zav and ritual impurity.
What if I was a kohen? Yeah, but what if I was a kohen working in the Beis Hamikdash?
I don't know. You'd probably know the halachas though. If you're a kohen in the Beis Hamikdash, will be up to date. We'll actually have an application on our phone that would help us track. So Alan, we got to get started.
I have a question similar to Alan's. So they laid on the bed. What are you supposed to do? Throw out the bed? Throw out everything? Throw out the bench?
You dunk your bed in the mikveh.
Yeah.
For real. For real, you put your mikveh.
I could just see a guy coming into the mikveh with his bed.
Yeah. You have to hope it floats. Maybe that's why we have water beds.
It's not supposed to float. It's supposed to go under the water.
Water bed.
As a matter of fact, you think it's funny, but the Mishnah that the rabbi mumbles at the end of davening in the Chabad shul so there could be an additional kaddish.
Yeah.
So it's actually a Mishnah from the laws of mikvot. And it's symbolic. It's Mishnah in general. It's connected to the neshama, with mikveh, purity. And the Mishnah that we actually mumble is Hitil boy es hamita. If a bed was dunked in the mikvah, the legs are probably going to sink into the mud because the olden day mikvahs didn't have very well finished floors. It's pure. It nonetheless becomes pure. Because ultimately, before the legs sink into the mud, they expose to the water. And so, without going to the rest of the Mishnah, it's actually, it sounds funny, but it's actually was once upon a time a halachically relevant fact. You needed to toivel your bed in the mikvah, and they probably had mikvahs that were designed for it. When we all go to Eretz Yisrael the next time with Hashem's help soon, and we'll do a tour, we'll find out that there are a lot of mikvahs from the Second Temple era. And we could do a little survey. Maybe the beds were smaller, maybe they were made of pieces, but there were probably also special mikvahs for. Anyway, so that is that. So it does sound funny, and if someone shows up to a local mikvah with a bed, they'll probably be asked to leave. But in temple times, it was a little less preposterous. My dear friends, to all, looking forward to continuing our studies tomorrow. Dr. Pasternak, I'm sorry about yesterday. In 2 minutes, we should, or 1 minute now. We'll have the Chumash share with Rabbi Sholem. Until then, dear friends, be well. Thank you all. Tomorrow, Be'ezer Hashem on as usual. Yes. Oh, yeah. Tomorrow we're on. It's a fast, so we won't have coffee. Maybe it'll be a little short. Maybe it'll be a little shorter than usual.
Go fast. We'll go fast.
We'll go fast. It's a fast day. But yes.
Are you here, Bernie? Or
I'm here right now. I'm here. By the way, the elevators are fixed in the East Building.
I saw a note, but for how long?
For how long? Right when they got that, I went out because somebody staying there had to go downstairs. They were out in the South Building. And now they're back up in the South Building. The guy said he's going to fix it. It's a small glitch.
Bernie, God forbid.